Hello and welcome to another video. In this one I have updated the positions in the Kherson counteroffensive to give a clearer picture of what the fighting is like and what the Ukrainians have to push through to actually get to Kherson and the northern area of the front line. So if we look at the positions here, I've lined out the different lines of defense the Russians have set up and what we are seeing the Ukrainians trying to accomplish. So starting in the south around the Kherson city itself, we see that Russia has three lines of defense. They always do that, especially here in the Kherson since the start of the war. They've had these same lines of defense. So the first one is from Oleksandrivka and all the way up along the front line. This is where Russia has positioned their troops with artillery support in the surrounding areas, most likely somewhere close to the second line of defense, so that they are in safe distance from the fighting. So what we're seeing is the Ukrainians are trying to push through the Russian line of defense, the first one, to reach the second one from the south, and that way cut off the contingency of troops that Russia has on the first line of defense to the west. This will allow them to encircle these troops as they pin them down with their forces in the west and try to catch as many as possible in a pocket. That way they will have a line of defense going on against the Russian line of defense by taking these villages here in the south by the coast and meeting up with these villages here in further up north. That way they'll be able to prevent the Russians from saving the pocketed soldiers and also allow them to slowly grind them down without losing too many men. That way they will be able to push from the west down this main highway that goes to Kherson itself and focus a lot of Russian troops in the south. At the same time, it will force the Russians to consolidate their forces in the center with the second line of defense, connecting it in a way like this to set up a smaller defensive line that isn't in danger of getting pincered. Now that would merge the first and second lines of defense, and you're probably wondering what is up with this whole open area. Well, the fact is that in the south, the distance between Kherson and Mykolaiv is much greater than in the north. This means that there is this open area that isn't exactly open, but more that there's this front line that covers this whole area, and there's no need for a second line of defense here. But most likely there's contingencies of troops situated around these villages, so they're able to move to whichever direction help may be needed, so that they can cover up any gaps in the defensive line. As for the north, the reason why the Ukrainians aren't trying to push through here is because they can achieve a much better and greater results by pushing to the east from the west, as that will cut off this whole pocket of Russian forces, as the Invalets River is currently unpassable, and they'll be able to cut off this main highway that goes to the south. So with a large contingency of troops pinning down the Russian troops in the north and a push through from the west to the east, they'll be able to cut off the Russian forces in the north. So what the Russians are doing is that they're trying to focus as many forces as possible here in the center to avoid a breakthrough. This will weaken the flanks. However, the flanks are in a position where if the Ukrainians manage to push through, they'll have to advance exactly 45 kilometers to reach the Kherson city. So they are in a position where the center is much more important than the sides. So they had always had their eyes on the Posad-Pokrovsk buildup of troops, which is why they're able to hold back any advances in the center, as they're aware that letting the Ukrainians break through here is disastrous for the Russian defensive line. And moving on to the east, we see that the Ukrainians are trying to push through the center. Before the counteroffensive started, the Russian defensive line looked a bit more like the river line, so they had protected the river line and this road to the north. That is their first defensive line. It has been broken through in most places except for around the center, between the southern and the northern front of the northern front. We see these villages, Velika Oleksandrivka and Mala Oleksandrivka, these are still not involved in the fighting, which means that Russia has a contingency of troops here, which are preventing Ukrainians from passing through, which is why we see them trying to pass through at Devdiev Brid to enlarge their pocket area to get a further beachhead and move more troops into this pocket. So what we're seeing right now is the Ukrainians trying to consolidate their push through the first line of defense and start an attack on the second line of defense, which I have calculated to be around this village chain, so that they are positioning their artillery in these villages, which is a solid 15 kilometers away from the center of the Ukrainian pocket, which will allow them to push and shoot any Ukrainian troops trying to advance from this area. And the second line of defense is also around this highway here, or rather than a highway, it's just the main road. As we have seen the Ukrainians multiple times try to take the village of Pruskinsky, but has failed so far. That is most likely because Russia has some important and skilled troops in this area to prevent it being taken, as that will cut the second line of defense in half, allowing them to pincer the first line of defense from the west. And they are also trying to push from the north to create this pincer maneuver and cut off the forces by the river, allowing the Ukrainians to safely pass through the whole river from the whole western side. So I assume that is their goal by pushing from the north and the center at the same time, northwards and southwards. Taking Devdiev Brid will give them huge advantage, as that will allow them a further bridgehead, but also to cut off any supplies coming from the south, forcing the Russians to supply through these smaller roads that we find located around the farmlands, which allow the Ukrainians to pick them up with artillery from across the river. As we can see, it has great range to do so. So that is the objective of the Ukrainian army in the north. If we look at this eastern part, it is very risky for the Ukrainians to pass through here, as to the east they have the Dnieper River, which they are unable to cross, and to the west there will be a long defensive line of Russian forces, and they also have no breakthrough here in the west. So most likely they will not try to push through this main road until they have taken the river line, and then they will try to cut it in two by pushing from the southeast and from the west simultaneously to pocket all the Russian forces here in the north, which is why we are not seeing a lot of fighting here in the northern area, only a northwestern area through Vysokopilia, trying to encircle the first line of defense and then push through the second line of defense. This will force them to fight the third line of defense, which is located at this village chain here, and after that, they will try to connect by the through two main roads and encircle the forces in the center, reaching Novakhovka and taking the northern area of the Kherson area. So I think that is their current plan and their course of action, as we can see from the moves they are pulling and how they're trying to push as many forces in these bridgeheads as they can to allow them to engage in some kind of high mobility warfare that allows them to cut off the Russian forces. As we know so far, the Russian forces aren't that willing to enter in close quarter combat. They wish to attack with their superior firepower and bigger guns in the artillery warfare, which means that generally if the Ukrainians start a large push, they are able to break through the Russian defenses, as they aren't exactly prepared for such a offensive. However, with the large amount of Russian forces in the Kherson area, we see that the Russian defenses are holding up much better than we see at the Kharkiv front, which is why so far we're seeing that the situation doesn't align at all with what we saw at Kharkiv. And we'll see how much more supplies and equipment and manpower Ukraine can put into this counteroffensive. And anyone saying that this is a ruse or a lie to get the success at the Kharkiv front, I disagree with you. The amount of manpower and equipment used here and this legitimate strategies that are being planned out and executed shows that they are serious about the Kherson counteroffensive, and they're pouring as much equipment and manpower and supplies as they can into this counteroffensive to achieve some kind of success in the west as well. That's going to be it for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day. Please subscribe if you liked and like the video. Thank you all and see you all next time.